This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Grief Believe. And every month we take a different topic about grief and we share it with you. And we're hoping that we're helping so many people out there that are hurting. And we hope that we're learning how to have the right kind of conversations. Today, Alison is going to be leading us. And for those of you who have been online with us for the last couple of months, Alison has been out on another assignment. So we've missed you. Welcome back. And we finally get to meet your guests. So give us some background.
So Hans Hageman is my guest, and I have known him and his family since I was 15 years old. So a very long time. And I was good friends with his younger brother, and I knew the whole family. Hans, in his career, has been an educator. He has changed lives all over the world in various ways. And he can tell it better than I can. So he's done work. He's currently in the Mississippi Delta, doing some really important work there. I can't actually capture how amazing Hans is myself. Um, so I'm looking forward to talking to him about education, the importance of education, the importance of opening up possibilities in places where hope has been lost. And I really see a lot of the work that he's done in his life as impacting grief and cracking things open and providing new possibilities. Because one of the things we've about on here is how grief provides clarity. You can really see what's missing in the midst of grief. And then once you have clarity, then you can get into action. And what Hans has done throughout his entire career is get the clarity and get into action and make things happen. So, Hans, that's somewhat incoherent bio, but this is really how I see you and how I see the work that you've done. And I'm looking forward to hearing some more details about you, your work, everything.
Thank you, Alison. That wasn't incoherent. It actually, however one were to phrase it, it kind of patterns the path of my life. One of the things that always amused me is when I would talk to headhunters, they would ask me about my career trajectory, and there never was any. It was to serve a life of purpose, and learned that early on with my parents, Reverend Dr. Lynn Hageman and my mom Leola Hageman. Uh, in kind of a and it feels kind of like a reverse move. I'm here in the Mississippi Delta, as you mentioned. My mother's family came up in the Great Migration from the South to Chicago, and that's where she met my father. My mother was African American. My father was came from a poor white farming family in Nebraska, and we eventually all made our way to New York City, where they started a residential drug treatment center out of the East Harlem Protestant Parish, and that was our home. And so we had kind of my brother and sister had a bit of a schizophrenic existence, where we would be in this building with dormitories below us, and with all men. Women would come in during the day for treatment and counseling and vocational training, but at night it was 50 men, most of them recently released from jail or prison, and many of them Vietnam veterans who had developed drug habits in Vietnam. And so as little kids, that's who our playmates were. And my mother and sister and I all went to elite private schools, and we did well there. But wearing our jackets and ties for me and my brother, and my sister with her uniform, going back and forth, it was different. But one of the things our parents always taught us was that we had to serve a mission larger than ourselves. And for me, that turned into, and please stop me if I'm going on, because I've been on the planet for a while, and but uh, for, for for me, the vehicle for that was going to be law. And as little
Mhm.
kids, we would see our father going down to march with Dr. King. And I have letters and letters of thanks and pictures of my father with Dr. King, thanking him for his participation. And even as young kids, it was clear, and our parents made clear that Dad may not come home one day.
Mm.
That was also the case during the '64 riots in Harlem, where he went out into the street with other clergy to try to keep the casualties and the damage down. But he was always out there, and watching him and watching my mother doing her thing in terms of supporting local politicians and so forth, I felt law was going to be the best vehicle. And so that's after Princeton, went to Columbia Law School. I first had some Army training because I was in the Army Reserve, where I hung out with people like former, what is it, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, recently retired. He
Oh,
was
wow.
as a buddy of mine, and went to Air Assault School in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I saw a different part of the world other than New York. In college, I was also fortunate enough to travel to Sudan, where I led a group of college students at the age of 21 to Sudan as part of something called Operation Crossroads Africa, which is a forerunner to the Peace Corps. And my parents never told us how we were supposed to serve, but
Right.
they wanted us to figure out our own path to that. And as I said, law, and the law practice ended up leading me to first corporate work. And my mother said, "What are you doing? You're supposed to be saving the world. I don't know how you're doing that, practicing with mortgage-backed securities or doing real estate law." And she was right. So I quickly left that and ended up under Robert Morgenthau, a legendary district attorney in Manhattan. And that's where I also reconnected with somebody who down the line was going to be helpful to me, John F. Kennedy Jr., who was a few years behind me at the school I attended, collegiate school. And John and I,
He
our
was in
paths
my
crossed
grade,
in the district
actually.
attorney's office.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, and John, when we were there, so I saw everything in the law that you could possibly see, right? And they say the two things you don't want to see being made, one is sausage, the other's law. And so I was chief counsel to a U.S. Senate subcommittee. I was an assistant district attorney.
Wow.
I had practiced briefly in corporate law. I was a public defender in Harlem for something called the Neighborhood Defender Service, and I wasn't saving the world there either. And so spoke to my brother Ivan, who had graduated from Harvard with high honors in 3 years and then became a janitor at Harvard, where the dean of the ed school said, what are you doing? I know about your academic record. You should be doing something other than that. As you figure it out, why don't you at least get your master's in education?" So that's what my brother ended up doing. And he was teaching, he taught at collegiate, but he also taught in public school. And I said, "Look, what do you think about us starting a school?" And he said,
Mhm.
"Well, he says, I'm kind of happy I got benefits." He says, "I don't know how you're going to do that." And this predated charter school. So where were we going to get the funding? How are we going to get approved? Who was going to approve us? And we had decided that we were going to do it in the building where we grew up. Our parents were in poor health. The residential drug treatment center had scaled down. I wanted to keep my parents in their home, among other things. And I said, "Well, what would it take for you to join me?" And he says, "Well, why don't you get your feet wet running the after school there? And if you can raise $50,000, I'll join you." So that comes back to John F. Kennedy Jr., where I asked John if he would serve on our board. And he says, "Well, no, I've joined a new board called the Robin Hood Foundation." He says, "But I will make you our first ask." And he kept
Wow.
his word. And he was really essential to our survival the first few years because Robin Hood was, I don't know what they were looking for, but it wasn't necessarily us in our school. But John would always advocate each of those years. And I heard at the meetings, people would say, "Well, John doesn't talk a lot at these meetings. So if he thinks these guys are good, let's just fund it." Right. So had also $25,000 from a professional gambler, and that's how we got started. 32 or whatever years later,
That's great.
my brother's still running the school. I moved on to do different things, and now I'll jump forward to. I came down here to Mississippi to run something called the Tutwiler Community Education Center. Um,
So
that
Hans,
was a thing started by some nuns. Yeah.
Hans, a quick interjection.
Yes.
So
Yes.
back to the East Harlem schools. So I went by to
Hmm.
say hi to Ivan, and he popped out. They had Friday meetings, and they would bring in people to talk to the kids. And the day that I was there was someone from an NGO that was speaking. And I went and sat and listened to the kids ask such smart questions of this NGO representative. And then I volunteered there for 20 years.
Yeah.
So, but this is the kind of organization that Hans and Ivan created and that Ivan continues to be the principal for. And this is where he launched out of and went on to the other things that he's done in, you know, his last job at Tutwiler and now with what is going on now. And the thing that I didn't say at the beginning was you may have people on the panel raise their hands and ask you a question in the course of your talk. Okay?
And please interject because I can go on because there is no career trajectory. I mean, you mentioned after I left Exodus House, the school, I went to a place called Boys and Girls Harbor, founded by Anthony Duke, who is the heir to the Duke fortune, and something that had been started in 1937. And it was a big jump from the school to this place where there were like 3,000 kids, 350 employees, a charter school, which was supposed to be the crown jewel, but was actually a failing charter school. So I had to turn that around. And I was there for, I guess, about 7 years before I butted heads again with my board, which is a thing that I do. These were mostly investment bankers, hedge fund managers, private equity people, 35-person board, mainly white, mainly male, who were there to tell me how to do my job in the neighborhood that I grew up in. And sometimes we butted heads. However, some of my biggest supporters actually were from places like McKinsey, or were the hedge fund managers, or were private equity people, but who got what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
But and just before Tutwiler, Mississippi, I had run a program in the Hudson Valley for garden-based education that was in 11 elementary schools. I also started a school in a program in a maximum security prison called Goshen Secure Center, where teenage boys convicted of extremely violent crimes are sentenced. And it was vegetable gardening, and I then snuck in mindfulness, and then I also snuck in a breathwork coaching certification course, which the Office of Children and Family Services in New York State approved, the first of its kind in the country. And I'm going to try to bring some of those things down here to the Mississippi Delta. But Tutwiler Community Education Center, as I was mentioning, was started by some nuns in the 80s. A white nun from the Midwest, or maybe she was from the West Coast, she had done some work after she had undergone a miraculous physical recovery herself and wanted to bring the medical gifts through osteopathy to this community. And she wrote to a number of communities offering to help create a medical clinic. The only place that answered her was Tutwiler, the mayor of Tutwiler. And Tutwiler is the town where, if people are familiar with the civil rights history a little bit, it's where Emmett Till's body was prepared for burial. He was tortured and murdered just a few miles down the road from where I am in Sunflower County. There's a lot of history here that particularly resonated with me because of my father's work down here. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And so at Tutwiler, I was tasked with turning it around, and we were making tremendous progress there. I had a robotics program that was being brought in from San Francisco. I had a woman who was a senior vice president at a drone medical delivery company who was going to be putting in a drone training company. The University of Mississippi was collaborating with us to put on a classics program. We had a quilting program. And then I heard that my board members, a few of them, and it's interesting because I was warned, be careful, there's a lot of racists down here. It's not what people think, at least how I've experienced it. And it's not the people with the Confederate flags or the guns in the back of their pickup trucks that are the ones you have to worry about. For me, it was liberal white elites outside of the Mississippi Delta who had their own grift going on with regard to nonprofits. And so on a recording that was played for me, I was told that I was moving too fast, that, quote, these people in this 98% African American town with a 45% persistent poverty rate in this was regarded by the USDA as a food desert, that they didn't understand what I was trying to do. And
So,
it was a
Hans,
pretext. Mhm.
can you describe a little bit, because you say Mississippi Delta, and you and I have talked about what that looks like and what that feels like. The two prisons and the crop dusting that doesn't take care of the land. And the threading in of your past history, the work in Hudson with foods absolutely comes in here. So there are kind of threads of your life. And can you paint a picture of what it's like to be there?
For me, it's hard getting perspective. And people, my son came down, he graduated from UVA this past June. Um, and seeing it through his eyes was a little jarring because he was horrified. Um,
Mm.
my brother even called me. He says, like, I looked on Google Maps. He says, I seen the kind of structure you're living in and where you're living. He says, you're in a tornado zone and you're in a structure where you're 15 times more likely to die if a tornado is anywhere close to you. I mean, so that's for starters. You mentioned the crop dusting. It's these planes literally will fly less than 100 feet above where I live. And I had thought I was going to come here to the Mississippi Delta and farm country and rolling fields, and I was going to have a start a bee colony, and I was going to grow food in the backyard, and I was going to have be able to give vegetables out to people. And I was told by somebody here, they said, if you do that and it's not covered, and you're not paying careful attention, that everything will die. They say the bees will not survive. That's just
Wow.
from the start. And if you're trying to grow vegetables, understand that no matter what you do, there will be pesticides on those vegetables.
Hmm.
Um, and so I was going to do a hydroponics program, right? And
Right,
so you talk to the people here just to get them to understand the concept of hydroponics or fresh food. It was tough because they eat what they eat and they eat what they can afford to eat. And if you're going to go to a supermarket, you're going to drive at least 45 minutes each way. And if you don't have transportation, what are you going to do?
right,
Um, and you see the effects in terms of not Mississippi. And you go outside the Mississippi Delta, and it's funny because people in Mississippi will say, "Oh, if it wasn't for the Delta, Mississippi would be one of the top performing states," which is not true.
right.
However, the challenges that the Delta has are pretty daunting.
Yep. Can you talk about so at Tutwiler, one of the things that you did was you went after the Yes Foundation prize. Could you talk about that and about how you took two of the people you were working with you to those places? Because I really saw that as an amazing thing to show people from the Mississippi Delta, because you're talking about your son came down and he saw it with you having lived there for a while very differently than you did. And
Yes.
so it's kind of,
And I'll talk about those two people from my staff, but my son, when he visited, two things happened from that. One is he got a dog from a shelter where he was going to school in Virginia and drove the puppy back down here. And he says, at least have a puppy. He says, I, and he drove back essentially with two stops to sleep in church parking lots. He had planned to stay other places, but he apparently was so traumatized by
no.
seeing his dad here that he basically drove straight back to New York. But yeah, the Yas Prize was interesting. A collegiate classmate reconnected after decades and said, "Are you familiar with the Yas Prize?" I said, "I've never heard of it. Tell me about it." He says, "Well, Jeff Yas and his wife, they're billionaires and they're really interested in education reform. You should apply." I looked at it, I looked it up, and I saw that there were 3,000 applicants when I was applying. And I called him back and said, "There are 3,000 applicants. We don't have a school here. We're just a community center." He's just apply. He's like, "I got faith in you." We ended up becoming one of 33 semifinalists out of those 3,000, which came with a $250,000 award and a really nice network. That was, again, another trigger for people who didn't want to see me or the center thrive. But as part of that, we had to travel to Cleveland. We had to travel to Miami. We got to travel to Cleveland. We got to travel to Miami. We got to travel to New York. And I was trying to bring three of my staff members. One couldn't make it. So I brought two young women with me who born and raised in the Delta. Um, each, I guess, what, 24 and 25 years old. They had never been outside the Delta, and they got to see possibilities. And that's one of the things here that breaks my heart for the young people here. I've kind of given up on old people like me here.
Oh,
And I was chastised by some of the senior citizens when they were saying, "You don't understand. Uh, we're older, and things are the way they are. They're never going to change." I said, "How old do you think I am?" And when they found out, that I was 66, they kind of took a step back and had to come through another angle on the thing.
right.
But essentially, they had given up, and the best that they could do was tell their kids just do well in school. But beyond that, there was no real vision. And so getting these two women to see the possibilities, I still think they're going, even though I had to leave Tutwiler, they're going to do really big things. But the kids here, I mean, when you talk about grief and talk about loss, it's always something, whether it's a school closing or a teacher leaving, where it's incredibly hard to retain teachers here anyway. Um, I tried to start a program around grief and loss. And one of the local pastors was trying to work with me, but he says people won't acknowledge their grief. He says because things are always
Yep.
happening. They're never settled. They have become resilient, but not in a way that they become anti-fragile and grow from the experience. They're able to bounce back, but only so far as to be able to survive in their current environment. I had one young man who helped me at a memorial service that we were holding at the center for somebody who had passed. And there were people coming up to him. And this is a young man who he was 18, and he had cornered me at one of those a store that a woman who's trying to do something about the food desert thing here um, had created. And he followed
Yep.
me out. He had just checked my stuff out, and he says, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Would you mind being my mentor?" And I was like, "But," I said, "all you did was ring up my groceries." He says, "No," but he says, "You have a really funny accent, but you seem really nice and really smart." And I'm like, "I have a funny accent, but okay." Uh, um, and so he and I, working together, and we would talk once a week. And he came and helped me with it at this memorial service. And there were people walking by saying, "Hey, don't I know you?" to him. And he would say, "No, ma'am. No, sir. No, ma'am." But it happened 5 times. I said, "This is a small town." I said, "All these people can't be wrong." He goes, "I'm related to all of them." He said, "But I can't stand them and I can't stand this place. And I'm going to leave as soon as I can."
Wow.
Um, and most of the young people have that attitude. There are others. I talked to one young man who, when I was at the center, decided he was going to give up his gang affiliation to come and spend more time at the center. But he says, "No," he says, "the bad guys are going to end up killing each other." He says, "And then I want to be one of the people who's going to be here to build this town back up." And there's no backup. This town was never up.
Right.
But
Right.
the fact that this child had a vision that there was a possibility, it's rare. And that was one of the things I was trying to do with the Tutwiler Community Education Center. And so from the center, uh, the three white board members, there were 4 men, 3 of them were white. They didn't tell the women members of the board that there was going to be a special meeting with
Mm.
me and them. And at that meeting, they told me I was moving too fast, that I needed to slow down, that I needed to reallocate the prize money to other things. I said, "No, it's supposed to be for a micro school network. That's what it's going to be." The conversation got heated. No profanity on my part. I was told by one of them told me to shut up. I,
Wow.
I took offense at that. They then moved the meeting outside, and that night, it was March 11th, and on March 12th, at 9 o'clock at night, they said, "As you know, Mississippi is an at-will employment state. You were hereby terminated. You were not owed any reasons." That also happened to be my birthday, and I think they knew
I
that. So that was
remember. Yep.
little did they know I hardly celebrate my birthday, so that worked out for me. Um, but then a week later, I got a call from the chief of staff of the local congressman, and she said, "We know what happened to you because a lot of our constituents are calling and they're angry and they want to do something. We're telling them don't because it could cost you your jobs." She says,
Mm.
"But stay tuned. Somebody's going to be calling." And then I got a call a few days later from a woman named Rena Evers Everett, who is the daughter of civil rights icons Medgar Evers and Myrlie Evers Williams. And
Yep.
she said, "I've spoken with my mom, and I know it's a lot to ask." And she said, "And you know that I know how dangerous it is for you to stay if you've made the enemies that you've made." She said, "But Mississippi needs you. The Delta needs you. And would you be willing to take over the Medgar and Murley Evers Institute, which I've been running for the past 10 years? And I said, well, I said, that's a big ask. Because I had friends telling me, get out, pack up, don't
Yeah.
even stay 2 weeks, get your stuff out of there. And I was seriously considering that. But when I got that call, when I heard that Murley Evers in particular was making the request, I gave it serious consideration. And I told Rena, look, I'll stay, but I'm not going to be executive director. I want to be co-executive director with you. And so that's where it was. And so for the past 6 months, we're essentially regenerating the Medgar and Murley Evers Institute. We have several programs. Next year, 2025, is Medgar Evers' 100th birthday celebration. So we're planning a lot of things around that. And when you talk about grief, the grief that family has, I mean, they have to revisit it all the time. It's part of their legacy. It's part of their mission,
Right.
and I'm an empath, and so feeling that, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It's interesting to me how would you say that you found the career paths or you were just called in different directions? Because I see a clear thread. So there's a clear service thread, but without the Hudson Valley, you wouldn't have known as much as you knew about mindfulness and breath and food. Without Tutwiler, you wouldn't have moved into where you are now. So it feels like each led to the other, and there was a thread of education through all of it. Of
There's a threat. Yes, absolutely a threat of education. And again, I don't know if this may be triggering for your audience in terms of, but if you want to take a chance, I'll tell you part of the story about why I got involved in the first place with education. Um, we didn't have a lot of money, and so for certain things. And so one day my parents were approached and said that there was a doctor at Rockefeller University who was seeing patients. He was a renowned doctor, and that he would see me and my brother for free. I became his patient, and he's dead now, but he was in the news as a serial pedophile.
oh
Um,
man.
but as a patient of his, and I was a preteen, I made the decision that I was going to be at least the one adult that any child would be able to trust.
Mhm.
And that's shown up different places. Obviously, it's shown up in the schools. It's shown up coming to Tutwiler, Mississippi. It shows up in the girls' school in India that I started with local partners in Lucknow, India, for Hindu and Muslim girls
Yep.
that ran for 10 years, but we had to shut down when Hindu and Muslim fundamentalists said you're not supposed to be educating Dalit girls, you're not supposed to be educating girls, and you're certainly not supposed to be educating Hindu and Muslim girls together. But however that was, I was always going to reach out. And so, yes, there is a thread, or a red thread, or whatever it's called, that runs through all of that. And I'd like to think that I'm open to, in my opinion, divine guidance in terms of saying where are you supposed to be next.
Right. I mean, because it's education, so it's learning your typical stuff that you learn, reading and writing and all of that, but it's also education in terms of you have the capacity to learn what you need to learn. You have the capacity to learn how to fly drones, kids, which gives you a possibility to get out of where you are. Karen, did you have a
Yeah, I
question?
have a
And I
question.
want to touch back on that, but Christina and Karen had yeah.
Yeah. So my question to you, Hans, is you're doing all this work and work is needed. Who is going to follow in your footsteps? Because, we're
Great
mortal.
question.
Okay. And
Great
one of
question.
the things I heard you say is that the people who are living in the Delta, they don't know really what's outside of it, and they think that they're stuck. I used to teach at an inner city college, and my students said the same thing to me. Why are you making me learn this stuff? I don't need to. I just need to learn the electrical. Why do I have to learn people skills? And I would say, because when you get out there, and they said, but I may not live another day. And I had to sit down and talk to them and understand where they were coming from and try to encourage them that if you take a few steps, you can probably get out of there. But now you have to help others get out as well. So who's going to help when you say one day, I can't do this anymore?
A few things. Allison mentioned the young women that I brought on these trips. And that's never going to leave them. I also believe kind of in the butterfly effect. And so in the independent high school I started, I had a student who was only there for 6 months. He dropped out. He reached out to me. This is 20 years later to say, I have nobody else. My cousin, who I was closest to, was murdered. He says, I don't want to leave my project department. He says, but I want to become an electrician. He says, I just need somebody to tell me I can do it. Right. And so he and I would communicate weekly. And now he's back on track. He's part of a union apprentice program. So there's that part of it. But Rena Everett and I talked about, I said, Rena, I said, come on, you know how old you are. You know how old I am. How is this going to work? I said, I have to know that one of the things we're going to do is to create a succession plan for the work that we're doing.
Mhm.
And she absolutely agreed. So there are going to be young people who you have to have the glimmers to say, well, where are we going to put our attention? And so we hope that our programs, they're in Jackson. Hopefully they'll be coming to the Delta. Those are the glimmers that people can say, we didn't even know this existed. Now that we do, show us how to become part of it. So that's from the inside. From the outside, we're going to be starting in January what I've done for the last 5 years, which is something called a Princetonships. I went to Princeton and they have internships. And I mean, these kids from Princeton, I mean, they're incredible. They're incredible. They're driven. Um, they bring that discipline and doggedness that they have they show in their academics to projects like this. And it had been a little bit of a struggle. And I was told by administrators, there are people who don't want to be involved with the Delta. I'm like, really? And that's part of the challenge because people go to Detroit, Chicago, New York, talk to them about Mississippi Delta. It's a whole different thing. But I've got five, I think, really strong students, one of whom actually happens to be, her family is from Jackson, near Jackson, Mississippi.
Oh,
And
wow.
so they're going to be coming in to work with us. And so ideally, in my vision of the world, it's going to be the young people here collaborating with people from places like Princeton or some of the elite institutions, those people who want to advocate for social justice. Like, okay, well, if that's really what you want to do, here's where you have to go. I had an intern at Tutwiler from the Philippines who he had only been out of the Philippines once, and that was to attend Princeton. Before he left the Philippines, he had challenged some local corrupt politicians, and his family's home and business were burned down. But
Wow.
he still continued on to Princeton. His second stop in the United States was coming to Tutwiler to work as an intern. And now he's president of the Princeton student government, right? So and he's never going to forget his experience here. And he's from the Philippines, and I would not be surprised if he becomes the president of the Philippines, right? He's on that kind of a path. And so I have to have enough energy and enough touches to bring that to people. I'm going to New York next week to tell people in New York, this is what we're doing down here. I had somebody who was a protege of mine whose father said, look, I'm really rich. My son's going to inherit my wealth, but he needs to learn about other parts of the world. And so this young man worked with me at the school. And then he became the owner of a restaurant in Harlem. And he's going to allow us to use that restaurant for free as part of the celebration. And we're going to make a lot of new friends and acquaintances there. And so putting those tentacles out, getting young people here, and I'm going to try to get some of the young people here to that event in New York so that like this thing has reach. And it doesn't have to be about just Mississippi. It can be about the Deep South. It can be about the Philippines. It can be about India. It can be about Africa. And so, yeah, the succession plan is a big part of at least where my brain is.
It sounds like the cross-pollination is really important. That, um, you know, people have ideas about what the Mississippi Delta is until they get there. People have ideas about what the East Coast is until they get here. Um, and that misunderstanding and that sort of miss about kind of we're all people here And, you know, um, most of us are trying to make the world a better place. But so what kind of programs do you have planned for next year? Are you able to share any of that?
Well, the biggest one is kind of based on mutual aid societies that were started in Black communities during Reconstruction.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna be bringing some of the stuff that I was trying to do in Tutwiler to Jackson, Mississippi, and beyond. And so, about a half an hour away from me is a place called Rolling Fork, and that town was completely destroyed by tornadoes last year. Um, and one of the challenges there was a dearth of medical delivery drones and emergency relief drones and drones that could just see what the damage was in the path of the tornadoes. So I'm bringing back the drone program, for instance. The kids are going to be certified as certified emergency response team members through FEMA. They're going to be certified as mental health first aid people. And a recent New York Times article talked about the Black community having twice the rate of psychosis as the white community. And then if you come down to a place like this without the resources, with the intergenerational trauma, there's more and more research coming out about that. I think having these young people be aware of the challenges, being able to be on the front lines, addressing that is important. I have an acquaintance from back in my school days who was a co-founder of World Central Kitchens. So the food piece is going to be brought in. We were going to collaborate in the Hudson Valley before COVID struck. And so I'm going to go back to him now and say, hey, I'm in Mississippi. We can do this now. So the kids will be certified in a number of areas. They're going to, and as a part of that as well, they're going to be learning the civil rights and leadership legacy lessons of how did people during the civil rights movement, particularly like Medgar Evers, how did they get the word out? How did they organize? How did they deal with policy? What was
Right,
their approach to politics? And so the kids are going to learn that piece of it, but they're also going to learn actual skills that
practical.
will any community they find themselves in will be welcoming them with open arms.
That's great. Christina had a question, I think.
Yes, I did. Sorry, I was trying to unmute. So Hans, I want to ask, I know there are, if you can talk about those expectations or those challenges that you encounter, and how do you keep yourself grounded in this work? Because I could imagine that it can take a toll on you if you're not mindful of taking care of yourself.
Yeah, thank you for that question. A couple people
Great.
very close to me worried about my mental health down here, and I appreciate their concern. I do a lot of work though. I mean, the breath work that I teach, I implement. I meditate for 25 minutes every morning. Yes, a different something called sky meditation, which is research-based meditation. I have a prayer meditation that I do at night. Um, I exercise every day. I've got my dog. Um, and I'm very clear about what I'm supposed to be doing. It's an interesting time in my life because, there are a limited number of years. If I was 30 years younger, I'd have to seriously consider maybe you need to be somewhere else. Um, but here, I've come to the belief that if it ends here, that's fine, and so there's a certain level of peace to that decision. But I, so but just the basics, like I said, prayer, meditation, breath work, exercise, and then it costs me a little more than I want, but because it's a food desert, I'll order. Um, I found a place that has free range eggs that actually delivers from out of state or whatever. So I mean, I pay the extra for that. For the food that I have, I make sure it's high quality food. I don't eat sweets. I used to come home and I used to have a glass of wine because you're like, it's stressful. I might as well have a glass of wine. But then I decided, it's too remote. It doesn't make any sense. You're here every night. You would be drinking by yourself. So I haven't had a drink in I don't know how in about 6 months, right? And so it was just a natural progression but also keeping at the forefront. And I'm clear about my values in terms of creativity, service, freedom, and the qualities that I want to espouse and show, such as, wisdom, courage, self-discipline, love, and those are at the forefront. And I revisit those literally every day and say, what things are you thinking about doing today or this week that will serve you and move you further in that direction? And which things do you need to stop doing because they're going to keep you from living out your values and your virtues? So I keep it very, very conscious. I have a lot of time for reading, um, and all those things help. I've been told even by people in Mississippi, you have to get out every month, and I haven't done that really. The Yas Prize thing got me out a lot, so I got to see some of the other world and see how people are living. Um, but the other news there is when I go to New York, it's like I don't necessarily miss New York as much as I thought I would. And there's also a certain level of anger that I have when I saw a post on Facebook from a Princeton schoolmate who was essentially denigrating the entire South. And I knew where he was going with that, but he didn't make it clear enough so that anybody in this community where I live would say, "Oh, this is how they feel." Those
Right.
those Eastern elites, right? So there's a certain level of anger that people do ignore this place so much, and that's fuel that keeps me going as well. So all those practices and that anger fuel me.
That's great. Could you talk a little bit about, so you're a multifaceted man and you've just written a book, your second book, which it was about education and how teachers cannot burn out. Could you share, because that seems to thread right from this mindfulness piece.
And the book is kind of a backdoor way to start trying to work with some of the teachers first in the Hudson Valley, but then here down in the Mississippi Delta. However, the principles or practices in that book um, are actually meant for, in my opinion, anybody, and could be applied to anybody. As were in the first book, which was, mental toughness training for people who are gamers, right? Same thing. If you take those principles and practices and apply it, you're going to be better off. And so now, Alison, so you caught me because I'm blanking out on the name of the book that I've. Where is it? It's here somewhere. Um, where
Yeah,
is it? But yeah, so
I have it in my
um,
Kindle, but
yeah, I actually have to make some edits on it, so it should be some here somewhere. But yeah, so it's essentially a handbook or an entry point to working in the schools down here, and I still may do that. I have one of my former colleagues who left Tutwiler, who's doing some other things, and she's very interested in doing some consulting because she's working in GRE programs and talks about the young men, 23, 24, who are coming in and have talked about how absent fathers, mothers who are too busy trying to survive, trying to bring in the basics for the family, and how these young men had just drifted away from school and literally in fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, never to come back. Um, and they're trying to recapture something through this GRE program, but this former colleague of mine says, we really have to do something more because, and she's a native to this area as well, but sees even more clearly we have to figure this out.
right. It's the Joyful Teacher Blueprint,
That's right. That's right. That's
transforming
right. Yes.
classrooms through resilience, purpose, and joy.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep, yep. Um, yeah, and you put yourself in places which require toughness most of your life.
Yeah, yeah. It's yeah. I'll speak to friends who I haven't talked to in a while, and then I get to kind of do a life review, and it's like, oh, that's right. I forget. Or there was a schoolmate of mine, a classmate of mine at Princeton who dropped out freshman year. He happened to come from a very rural part of Maine, and he was until very recently a professor, and he had a lot of challenges, but he actually ended up hosting different student groups for me because he was also a river rafting and fly fishing guide.
Oh, wow.
Um, and so there are certain marks along the way that I've forgotten about, that I have people like that who forgot about. I recently reconnected with somebody who, in a very strange way, who I had asked to serve on the board of the first school 30 something years ago. And she was on a tremendously fast corporate trajectory. And she actually conquered the business world. But after all this time, we recently connected, and I get to then reminisce about, again, all the things that from that perspective that I had missed during that time period. Um, but yeah, I've tried to confront my fears, and there are a few of them. I had a fear of heights. That's why I went to the helicopter air assault school for the 101st Air Mobile Division, where we were rappelling out of helicopters from 100 feet in the air, and my equipment malfunctioned, and that didn't help. Well, it did
Oh my
actually help. It
goodness.
did. So 45% of the people, and these are people who are selected by their units, whether it's Green Beret, Ranger, Airborne, they're selected by their units. They make a few slots available to ROTC candidates. I was one of those people, and I
Wow.
had a malfunction, almost killed me. There were 5 people who quit right then, and they offered me the opportunity to take some time off to heal, because the rope had burned through my clothes and skin was off my hands and stuff. Um,
Oh
and
my goodness.
I came all the way to Kentucky. I came all the way to Kentucky. I'm not coming back. Let me finish this. Um, and so it was things like that, or as you know, the death threats that happened for me and my brother at the school from the drug dealers.
Right.
But again, all of those things were lessons, and the toughness was there. But even through that too, there were glimmers where the guy who ran the drug family there, he ended up in prison and ended up calling me when I was at my next job, saying, no, he's my brothers who were also in the drug business with him. They cut me off. My family's not talking to me. My children aren't talking to me. He says, I
Wow.
know it's strange. He says, we had some tough times, but would you mind if I called you every now and then or wrote you letters? Would you answer? And I said, absolutely. And we corresponded for 5 years. We would have continued, except he came out of prison and he was planning on coming to New York to take me to a big dinner, but he ended up getting shot to death in Miami. I
Ooh.
mean, so
Wow.
yeah, it's
Wow.
there are those points in life. Or during the death threats, there was a skinny Irish cop who would come on. Used to have these like kind of three-wheeled cycles things people would laugh. And this guy, all he had was his sidearm, and he would say, he says, "I'm off duty right now," and he was in uniform. He says, "But I'm going to stand out here with you till you close the school down." He says, "If they're going to get you, they're going to have to get through me too." Right? There's a skinny Irish cop.
Wow.
Like what? Why? But why? Why somebody like that? Right? And so you meet people like that through those challenges, through those travails. Um, yeah, it's there have been plenty of times where I've been scared, but moving through those are also lessons that I want to impart. The kids at the maximum security prison,
Yep.
they two of the kids were, I was told not to ask what their crimes were. They said, "You think it's murder, you think it's violent rape, you think it's robbery. Yeah, but it's worse," was what I was told by the administrators. Don't ask them about their crimes. And I never did, but I knew 2 of these kids had been charged with murder. They came up and approached me and they said, "We know why you're not scared of us." And I said, "Well, okay, why?" They said, "Because you did time." "How much time did you do?" It's like, I don't know what kind of vibe I'm giving off. No, but I was never an inmate. No, never did time. And they said, "But you're not scared of us." I said, what good would that do me? What good would that do me? I said, that's a no win for you. It's a no win for me. I said, I'm here to
Right.
serve you. And hopefully at some point you'll be able to get out and at least try to make up for a little of what you've done to the community that you grew up in, right? I don't know
Yeah.
if they got that message, but that's the message I was trying to impart.
It's interesting to me listening to your stories. There are over and over and over again threads of people coming up to you and saying, "Hey, will you hold me in place? Will you stand for me? Will you believe in me?" And you accepting that challenge with a phone call, with a note, with a whatever. But throughout the stories that you've been telling, beyond the work that you do, there have been these individual touches. And I think that those are the glimmers.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and it feels right to me, and it feels like I feel like I'm privileged. When people talk about privilege, I feel like I'm privileged because I know why I'm here.
Mhm.
Um, I can't remember who said it, but the two most important times in your life are, first when you're born, and the second time when you find out why. And I found out why, I think.
Yeah, I
Well,
think
you,
so.
sir, are appreciated. I must tell you that.
Thank you very much.
Christina?
Yes, I had another question. Can you talk about what are you finding with the children that are coming to you? Is it because they don't have someone at home that's listening, or what are the kind of different scenarios that you see with the children that they come to you?
That's almost always what it is. I mean, even from back in my days, I remember in the early 90s, there was a nice family across the street, mother, father, two daughters. And when crack came, the parents were completely taken out by the crack. And the daughters asked, I had to go to parent teacher meetings for these two girls because their parents just couldn't go. And you come down here, it's kind of cute. A 14-year-old kid will call and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'm like, the same thing I always do, like basically nothing other than work. And he said, "Well, can we go somewhere and you can buy me lunch?" And then they're clear. They're not actually one kid did say he was going to buy me lunch. I said, "You have no money." He says, "I'll try to get some before we go." I'm like, "Forget it, I'll buy." Um, but to have a 14-year-old, particularly in a place like this, where they're not used to reaching out, and very few, certainly male adult role models, and this is a very matriarchal society here, and the mothers are always trying to hustle and just keep things together. Um, and the two prisons are the largest employers. I have a prison 3 miles away, uh, and another one, I guess, 5 miles on the other side. And they're the largest employers here, and unless you're going to go to a Dollar General store or something like that for minimum wage. So there are very few role models or opportunities to see something different. I got one kid, and I'm hoping that he stays the course and stays in touch. He's an incredible athlete. I think very smart. It doesn't necessarily indicate that on his academic reports, but that's another reason why I want to do the micro school network to find alternative pathways to allow kids to attain, academic performance that beyond A, B's, and C's. But the kid also happens to be 14 years old. He's a football player. He's 6'1", 270 pounds, very athletic. If he just has a decent level of grades and figure out what he wants to, he will get a college football scholarship, right? But there's nobody in his life. He does. I've tried to talk to him about his father. He doesn't. He won't even broach that topic with me or allow me to broach it. Um, and there's nobody in his life to tell him, this is what you have to do to get to school. These are the kinds of things that you have to. If you don't get to the NFL, these are the kinds of careers that you need to look at. AI is. There's a guy I was recently introduced to from Nigeria who he's very big into AI, and he's trying to look at artificial intelligence with heart and figuring out how do you connect artificial intelligence with people who have heart in communities like this. And these kids are going to be left way behind if
Yeah.
they don't figure out how to interact with the technology now. And you speak to the kids here, and their only dreams, the girls, all they want to do is go into cosmetology, and that's great. But how are you going to make that a business? Who are your role models to make that a really a business you can really get traction in? The boys, they think they're going to all either be professional athletes or truck drivers, and even the truck driving profession is going to be taken over by robots at some point. And
Right.
so there are a few touch points for the kids here to think about career. And so I like it when and some of the kids are scared because I get it. I'm not sure who I would have reached out to if I had to be in that position at 14. Some guy rolls into town. I'm not gonna just reach out and say, "Hey, how you doing? Let's hang out." I don't do that now, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Is there any last words of wisdom or whatever that you would like to share with our audience? We're coming to the
I
top of
just think there are plenty of opportunities to reach out to young people in particular because I kind of decided that's what I have to do, continue to do, and figure out ways of leadership. There's a guy named Brian Johnson. There's a program called Heroic, for instance, where he teaches leadership and living through a set of virtues. I mean, even a simple, seemingly simple program like that, bringing it to communities like this, connecting children, as I mentioned, to artificial intelligence, paying attention to where education is going. That's why we're having the micro school network, because that's going to be the only way we'll be able to teach. There are these bright lines that have been created and sides that have been developed. And so the kids are the ones who end up suffering, so that you can't teach civil rights history because people will say, oh, that's critical race theory. And it's like, no, I'm not talking about critical race theory, however you want to define it. I'm talking about civil rights, which played an incredibly important role in this, certainly throughout the country, but certainly in this part of the country, in terms of people getting personal agency. So any way your listeners can and one-to-one mentor or find programs where kids and it's not just academic, because I'm not a big fan of programs that say, oh, 98% of our kids get into college. How many of them graduate? How many of them have meaningful careers after that, right?
Yep.
But helping kids develop their personal agency. Yeah, I mean, one of my other side projects is I work with women. I coach them, women who are in midlife transition. I've got a client in Sri Lanka who is an environmental leader. Is 34 and she's a real up and comer. And there are people like that. And she is eventually going to come and help work with some of the young people here to teach them about environmental sustainability in Sri Lanka and what the connections are to a place like this where environmental degradation is a real challenge.
Yep.
So, it's a very broad kind of winding answer, but there are so many ways to figure out where the intersections are
Yeah.
that I think people just have to commit to saying, I want to find a way to do it, and don't think it has to be big and replicable. It doesn't. Those individual touches, again, I believe in the butterfly effect. So
That's great. That's great. And we will have information on you in the show notes. So if people want to follow what you're doing, they can do so. Is there some connection point that you'd like to give, or just give your information in the show notes?
well,
What
I
do
mean,
you?
people can go to people can go to my website. Hans Eric Hageman. I got a few websites because I am multi-passionate. HansEricHageman.com is one. But
Okay.
stay in touch. I'm redoing, because that's what I have to do, the Medgar and Murley Evers website. But if people look at Medgar and Murley, I think it's Medgar and Murley Evers.bot. It's a bot I created that talks about that. And then just stay tuned for events that are happening both here in Mississippi, but also in New York, for the Medgar Evers 100th birthday celebration. And if people are ever down here, this is the home. This is the home of the blues. So if anybody ever decides to make the trek down here, Clarksdale is the place for the blues. They should look me up.
Sounds wonderful.
That's
Thank
great.
you for joining us. And Allison, thank you for introducing us all to Hans. It's been
Thank you so
a
much.
wonderful experience. To all of you who are listening, this is our last show of 2024, and we will begin our new season in January. So everybody take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye.